On Sunday the 5th of November 1961, three potholers were exploring old lead mine workings on the coast of the Gower Peninsula in West Wales called Brandy Cove. Some distance from the entrance down a shaft, whilst exploring a narrow side tunnel, they found their way blocked by a stone slab. Pulling it aside, one of them found a human skull, together with other human remains and scraps of clothing. The gruesome discovery brought back memories and unanswered questions of the disappearance and suspected murder 42 years earlier of a 26-year-old woman who had been living locally. This is the case of the vanishing of Mamie Stuart. In November 1893 in Sunderland, ship's captain James Stuart and his wife Jane had a baby daughter named Amy, one of three children. From an early age, she developed a passion for dancing. She also developed aspirations to perform in music halls and West End theatres. With her parents' consent, at the age of 15, she performed as a chorus girl on provincial tours with a troupe named the Magnets. She adopted the name Mamie and later left home to pursue her career, including forming her own dance company, which she named the Five Verona Girls. They performed nationwide and became a popular attraction, with the dancers sometimes daring to expose their legs to knee height, which was risque for the time. In early 1917, a member of the troupe had become pregnant, while another broke her ankle, which brought about the end of the dance company, and Mamie returned to her family home in Sunderland. In July, 23-year-old Mamie met a marine engineering worker called George Shotton, who had Welsh roots and was 14 years older, who was working in the local docks. He claimed that he was a widower, and the two soon began a relationship, with Shotton purchasing a diamond engagement ring for her within months of their acquaintance. Several months later, they had married in South Shields in March 1918. They both initially lived in Bristol, before relocating to Brynmill in Swansea, moving into a property in Trafalgar Terrace for 6 months. The two then moved to live in Caswell Bay in West Wales in the late summer of 1919, living in a remote rented cottage overlooking Swansea Bay, named Ty Clinwood. Mamie kept in regular contact with her family by letter, as she and her husband settled into their new home. Unknown to Mamie, Shotton had not been entirely honest with her. The truth was that they had both married bigamously, as Shotton already had a wife called Mary, whom he had married in 1905, and had a 3-year-old son called Arthur. The relationship was fraught with violence, with Shotton frequently beating his wife, with Mary believing her husband's employment being the reason he was frequently absent from the family home for extended periods of time, while in fact he was splitting his time between the two households 3 miles apart. Mamie was last seen in early December 1919. In letters she had sent to her parents in the months prior to her disappearance, she had hinted that her marriage was not a happy one, and was often subjected to violence, and of her increasing desire to leave Shotton, who refused to allow her to return to work in the theatre. Living over 300 miles away from her family, Mamie would often keep in contact with her parents by writing letters, which included noting her marriage with Shotton is difficult, and describing his behaviour as odd and violent. On one occasion, Mamie notes how she and Shotton had got into an argument, resulting in him hitting her on the head and leaving her with bruises. She returned to Sunderland after this incident for a short period of time, but would soon return to Shotton after he had visited her. The final correspondence she is known to have written to her parents was dated the 12th of November. Prior to this, one of the letters eerily mentions how if she were to disappear, to contact Mrs. Hearn, who Mamie and Shotton had previously lodged with. After not hearing from her sister for over a month, Edith Stuart contacted Mrs. Hearn, asking if she had any reason of why they had not heard from Mamie. Her parents posted a reply, although this letter was returned to them marked "House Closed." Convinced an error had been made by the post office, the Stuarts posted a reply-paid telegram to their daughter, although this was also returned. Shortly before Christmas 1919, a telegram was sent to Stuart's parents, apparently from their Mamie, wishing them compliments of the season. No further correspondence from Mamie or her husband was received by her parents. In March 1920, staff at Swansea's Grosvenor Hotel found that a trunk left by a male guest the previous December had remained unclaimed for approximately 3 months. As there was no address tag, the manager of the hotel contacted the police, who opened the trunk to discover 2 women's dresses and a pair of shoes, all extensively cut and torn. Also discovered inside the trunk were items of jewellery, a Bible, a rosary, and a manicure set. A scrap of paper was also discovered in the trunk, which had the address of Mamie's parents, who informed investigators their daughter was missing and that they had been attempting to locate her for several months. They handed over to the police several letters they had received from their daughter the previous year, revealing her increasing unhappiness regarding her husband and her fear for her own well-being. The Stuarts also had a letter Mamie had written a few weeks before her disappearance, in which she had said, "If you don't hear from me, please contact Mrs. Hearn and see if she knows anything about me. The man is not all there. I don't think I will live with him much longer. My life is not worth living." Investigators also discovered that in the letters to her parents, Mamie had described her abuse at Shotton's hands, her desire to stop living with him, and of her knowledge there was something strange about him. A maid cleaning the couple's deserted cottage in preparation for the arrival of new tenants recovered Mamie's mildewed brown leather handbag, concealed behind a dresser in an upstairs bedroom. This handbag still contained £2 in loose change and her sugar ration card. By the spring of 1920, South Wales police were convinced Mamie had been murdered, that she had died at the hands of Shotton. The most likely motive had been either rage, control, jealousy, or a mixture of the 3. Scotland Yard was contacted, and Chief Inspector William Draper sent to oversee the investigation. He ordered a thorough search of the cottage, the grounds of the property, and the surrounding terrain, although no trace of the missing woman was found. A nationwide search for her was ordered, with her description circulated throughout the country. No meaningful leads came to light. The chief suspect of both South Wales Police and Scotland Yard was Mamie's husband George Shotton. Draper quickly located him, and he was living in Penarth with his wife and child. He admitted to knowing Mamie and to leaving the trunk at Swansea Hotel, which he claimed he had done shortly after she had left him, following an argument early the previous December. He denied having married her or any knowledge of her current whereabouts. Despite Shotton's claims to the contrary, investigations quickly revealed he had been bigamously married almost 2 years earlier, although he denied doing so and said that when she walked out on him, he had simply chosen to go back to his wife. Scotland Yard also contacted Mamie's friend, Mrs. Hearn, who confirmed she had suffered domestic abuse at Shotton's hands, and had once begged her, "If I am ever missing, do your utmost to find me, won't you?" As the police could not find a body, they were unable to charge Shotton with her murder, as the law at the time prevented a suspect being tried for murder if there was no corpse. Convinced of, but unable to prove Shotton's guilt, by the mid-1920s, investigators at Scotland Yard began referring to this case as the perfect crime. Early in their investigation, the police had discovered that Shotton had bigamously married in South Shields on the 25th of March 1918. This bigamy charge proved to be the only one they could level against him. He was arrested on the 29th of May 1920 for this offence and brought to trial 2 months later at Glamorgan Assizes, pleading not guilty and claiming that although he had known and lived with Mamie, someone had assumed his identity to marry her. He also denied mistreating her and repeated his claim the two had parted company following a quarrel in early December. Several individuals testified at the trial the two were indeed married, and that initially everything had been harmonious. One witness to testify was Mamie's sister Edith, who said Shotton had frequently referred to "my own little wife," and had typically signed his letters with the words, "your own loving husband." The prosecuting counsel openly accused Shotton of killing Mamie, but in the absence of her body, nothing could be proven. In July, Shotton was sentenced to serve 18 months imprisonment with hard labour for bigamously marrying. Shortly after he was released from jail, his legal wife Mary divorced him. After Shotton was released from prison in early 1922, he moved to Tintern, where he ran a small holding. After several years living in the village, he abruptly left, possibly due to a local newspaper having revived the story of Mamie's disappearance and his suspected culpability. He then relocated to Balham in South London to live with his elderly mother, taking a series of different jobs. In May 1938, he was arrested for threatening his sister, Gladys Austin, with a revolver at her Fareham home. He was also charged with causing actual bodily harm. This incident arose from resentment between the siblings regarding their respective bequeathments in their mother's will. He was sentenced to 12 months in jail with hard labour. Following his release, Shotton severed all contact with his family and friends and moved to Ledbury, where he worked in an aircraft factory. He later relocated to Bristol, where he died of natural causes in April 1958. The case over the years largely faded into distant memory. That is, until Sunday the 5th of November 1961, when three friends who were potholers, Graham Jones, John Girk and Colin McNamara, went to an old lead mine at the top of the cliffs in Brandy Cove, and during their exploration made their grim discovery of a human skull and skeletal remains. Nearby lay a black celluloid hair clasp, still containing a tuft of mid-brown hair, items of jewellery, including a 7-inch brass chain, and several scraps of clothing. One of the potholers, John Girk, would later state that he and his friends had chosen to explore this area as it had formerly been used by smugglers, and that as the trio attempted to explore a ventilation shaft, their route through a narrow tunnel approximately 10 feet in length was blocked by a large stone slab. Pulling this slab aside, Girk observed a skull, which he turned to face him and realized it was human. The three men took the short walk to the local police station to report their find. It was not long afterwards that local journalists got hold of the story and began linking it to the disappearance of Mamie. Shortly afterwards, the investigation was handed over to the Glamorgan police, based in Bridgend. The hunt for Shotton reopened, only to find that he had died 3 years earlier in 1958, in a care home in Bristol. The remains were taken to the Forensic Science Laboratory in Cardiff, where an examination was conducted by 2 Home Office pathologists. The bones were reassembled into a complete skeleton, but it was minus the rib cage, and found to belong to a female between 5 foot 3 inches and 5 foot 4 inches tall, and it was determined that she was in her mid-20s, but not over 30. Sections of the skeleton had green staining due to copper contamination from the brass jury recovered with her remains. No precise cause of death could be determined, although the pathologists were unable to rule out strangulation or stabbing. The physical description of the remains, items found, and the location of their recovery matched contemporary descriptions of Mamie. The scraps of clothing and footwear and the jewellery found alongside the remains indicated it was her. An elderly lady who had been a close friend of Mamie identified both rings as belonging to the missing woman. Shotton's first wife was still alive. When questioned in 1961, she confirmed that her former husband possessed a violent temper, and that his violent temper, his adultery, and her conviction of his guilt in Mamie's murder while she had remained missing had been the reason she had divorced him. She further stated she had seldom seen Shotton following their divorce, and that he had never confessed his guilt to her. The inquest into the circumstances surrounding the death was held on the 14th of December 1961. Throughout the duration of the proceedings, her skeleton was laid on a table in the centre of the courtroom. Forensic testimony revealed the body had been severed at 3 equal lengths. One cut had been made at the lower femur, just above the knees. A second horizontal cut had been made through both humerus bones at midsection, with the instrument used to dissect her body also severing the lowest shoulder blades and her spine. Evidently the murderer had endured difficulty severing her body, as several bones had striations and indentations, indicating her murderer had made several unsuccessful efforts to dissect her before severing her bones. No parts from the ribcage were recovered at the scene of her discovery. To assist in the formal identification, forensic experts superimposed a photograph of the skull that had been discovered over a smiling, life-size portrait of Mamie taking in her performing days. The coroner informed that although he was able to discount any form of skull trauma as being the cause of death, as no soft tissue remained, he was unable to pinpoint the actual cause of her death. Stating his feeling that the death was murder, he asked the coroner's jury the question, "Can you imagine any reason for sawing up anyone if the person had committed suicide or if the death was accidental?" Towards the end of the inquest, an 83-year-old retired postman named William Simmons told the coroner that in December 1919, as he had been delivering mail to the cottage, he had observed Shotton struggling to put a large sack into the back of a small yellow van, parked outside the front gate of the couple's cottage. According to Simmons, as he offered to help Shotton with the heavy load, he had looked up and observed his blue uniform before replying, "No, no, no! Oh God! You gave me a fright! For a minute I thought you were a policeman!" He had then seen Shotton place the load into the van and drive in the direction of Brandy Cove. The inquest into Mamie Stuart's death concluded that the remains were indeed hers, and that she had been murdered, although the precise cause of death could not be determined. Furthermore, the inquest concluded she had been murdered between the 12th of November and the 6th of December 1919, and that the now deceased George Shotton was responsible for her death. Her body had been concealed just 200 yards from the home she and Shotton had resided at the time of her disappearance. In 1950, a dentist purchased the remote cottage Shotton and Mamie had rented at the time of her disappearance. Performing drainage work around the property, workmen discovered a pit at the rear of the house, close to a hole in the foundations, which reached beneath the floorboards of the dining room. This pit had been filled with quicklime, although all that was recovered from it was one lady's shoe. At the inquest conclusion, Mamie's skeleton was retained at Cardiff University, where it is believed to have occasionally been used to teach students. No efforts were made to locate surviving relatives and return her body to the family. Mamie's great-niece, Susan Oldnall, discovered the whereabouts of her great-aunt's remains in 2019 when she was doing some ancestry research. She discovered that they were being stored in a cupboard inside a Cardiff University forensic laboratory. The senior forensic pathologist, Dr. Stephen Ledbetter, had retained the remains despite being urged to dispose of them, in the hope that one day a surviving member of the family might reclaim them. On learning of Oldnall's whereabouts and wishes, Ledbetter personally took the remains to Oldnall in order that she may be interred by her family. Mamie Stuart's body was buried in Bishop's Wearmouth Cemetery in Sunderland in December 2019. She is buried in a grave alongside her parents. 4 descendants attended the service.